I will go back to Mahlet because she will make her closing and final presentation for us. Mahlet, please, I invite you while we encourage the questions in the chat, to take the floor. Thank you, Mahlet.
Okay, thank you, Hermela, and thank you for all the speakers that spoke before me. I learned a lot, and how hard it is to speak after two good speakers. I mean, the best speakers on the subject, or presenters, researchers. Yeah, but regardlessly, I'm going to go ahead and do my presentation quickly. So the topic or the theme is GERD for all. GERD powers Ethiopia, empowers Africa, and also beyond that, GERD also sustains the world. My presentation is specifically GERD is a Pan-African project. And why do I say that? Why? Okay. In order to answer that, I will ask this main question, meaning how GERD is a Pan-African project, and while answering that, there are sub-questions to be answered. How Ethiopia and Pan-Africanism are connected, how is GERD aligned with the AU Pan-African principles and values, and how does GERD impact the region or / Riparian states, and what are the benefits to Africa. So just to say a little to give a background, Ethiopia and Pan-Africanism, as you know, for most of Ethiopians, and even I think Africans globally, Black Africans, I'm talking about, Pan-Africanism is born out of Ethiopianism, and there's the Ethiopian commitment also to liberate African people. That's also something we cannot overlook. And then Ethiopia being seen as a beacon of hope of Black peoples across the globe. And then it's one of the last Emperor Haile Selassie, one of the founders of the then Organization of African Unity, or now known as African Union. I mean, talking about Pan-Africanism as an Ethiopian, it's really impossible for me not to say a little about Emperor Haile Selassie, because he is a modern day architect of Ethiopian foreign policy towards Pan-Africanism. If you see also Ethiopian foreign policy, it's tuned based on Africa, and particularly its neighboring countries or the region. And also it has one of the priorities given in its foreign policy is strong and economic ties with Africa. Yes, we might say that there is no so much intra-trade within the continent, but regardlessly, the country gives that priority. And I think this is also well demonstrated how the power of GERD is going to be transacted, or is going to power, I mean literally, not only in Ethiopia but also to neighboring countries. And then Ethiopia has been this consistent supporter of the objectives, principles and values of the African Union, mainly which has direct relation to the subjects that we are talking about, is of course African solution to African problems. And why I have these leaders, if you see from Emperor Haile Selassie, you go to Mengistu Haile Mariam, there's Haile Mariam Desalegn, Meles Zenawi, and we have now Dr. Abiy Ahmed. These people are whatsoever are different in terms of their political ideology, but they have been consistent when it comes to Pan-Africanism, and that is also demonstrated, by the way, to the project, this national project of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, regardless of their difference, but they have stick to it. Now, let's go to one of the Pan-African values and principles in this contemporary of the African Union is Agenda 2063. Agenda 2063 is known as the master, or the master that's going to or the blueprint that's going to transform the continent into a global powerhouse. So this Agenda 2063 is actually adopted while the organization was celebrating its 50th anniversary in 2013. A little more than a decade has gone by now, I think, or just a decade. So these 7 aspirations, there are 7 aspirations in it. One is, allow me to read them: a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development, an integrated and politically united continent rooted in the ideas of Pan-Africanism and African Renaissance, good governance, a peaceful and secure Africa, an Africa with a strong cultural identity and common heritage, an African focused on people-driven development, especially women and youth and children. And then also a strongly united and resilient, influential global partner. So in this, you can see that GERD already relates that it's a people-driven project, meaning that, you know, from the straight vendor to the investor, in Ethiopia, people have contributed for the to build or to construct this dam. Also, being prosperous means, of course, for the development, you need power to have that integrated and politically united continent. You need to be strong in the member states have to be strong in the economy, so that also the GERD contributes towards that. Now, you know, those 7 aspirations seems very ambitious, as you can say, because it's Agenda 2063, meaning in 2013, these are adopted for the continent to achieve them slowly in the next 50 years, meaning in 2063. So in order to do that, what the African Union did is that they came up with flagship projects, a flagship project, I think there are 10 or 12, that member states in the continent should achieve, should adopt it, and then, you know, according to their priority in their own country, can start to implement it. And then this flagship, according to this flagship project, they are going to assess themselves, the member states, whether they achieve it or not after each decade. It's a 10-year plan. Then slowly, eventually, actually, this will help the member states to achieve those 7 aspirations or goals called the 7 aspirations of the Agenda 2063. If you allow me to read, these are the integrated high-speed train network, African commodity strategies, the African continental free trade area, the Pan-African e-network, African passport and free movement of people, silencing the guns, the Grand Inga Dam, Annual African Forum, single air transport network, African outer space strategy, and maybe there are some I missed. But now, how does GERD relate with this? That is the question. If you, as you heard, I mentioned the integrated high-speed train network in the continent. I mean, obviously, this cannot be implemented without having a power in each member states. And the African Continental Free Trade Area is actually one of the protocols which is adopted by the African leaders very fast, in less than a year, ever since its conception. In less than a year, more than half of the member states, meaning out of the 55 countries, more than half have ratified it. So there is this great zeal and interest to implement it. So what GERD does is it will boost that intra-trade in the continent. You know, when the transaction happen between countries, for example, there's a line-up of countries already to buy power from Ethiopia. There is Djibouti, there is Sudan, although their own end of relationship with Ethiopia. We don't know what's going to happen, but also there is Kenya. So Kenya, in fact, recently has their national, you know, power. The electricity company of the country, which is a national one, has signed a contract with Ethiopia to get power, I think starting from 2023, and that will make actually Ethiopia the second provider, the second largest provider of power in Kenya. And then the other flagship project of the African Union is of Agenda 2063 is African passport and free movement of people. One may ask, why this? I mean, what it has to do with GERD or with water? But the thing is, the free movement of people is intertwined with the African continental free trade area, meaning without a free movement of people, there cannot be any business. It's true that this protocol of free movement of people, especially, you know, who are considered bigger in the continent, they do not want to sign it. It's actually one of the slowest protocol in the African Union that's not adopted or ratified by member states. But the thing is, since this is intertwined with the African Continental Free Trade Area, the interest, that great interest we saw from the leaders to sign and ratify the African Continental Free Trade Area will automatically enforce also for them to ratify the free movement of people in the continent. And also, which I did not mention here, is also the free space, meaning it talks about the space with regards to flights. So, which Ethiopian Airlines is actually the first to adopt it. So most of the time we think that when trade happens, either it's a road transport or a shipment, but also there is air. So it will also enforce that, to have that free space offline in the continent. And now, what the GERD, the benefit of GERD for the Riparian states and the region. Of course, this has been said many times, but I'll just go through it. There's literally bringing light to Nile, bringing light to those the Nile riparian states, which I said also boosts intra-African trade, and it creates jobs of the youth. I mean, the Eastern Africa is known to be actually the region where the highest immigration of South-North is happening. So some researchers, as per my reading, are talking about, based on data, that it might reverse that movement from south to north to south, although we know that actually the 80% of immigration is happening within the continent, not really outside the continent. Again, talking about the benefits, I mean, Dr. Trusso have said it. I think also it's touched by others. It removes silt sedimentation. It also contributes significantly to mitigation of drought. There's a supply of clean and renewable energy, which has to do with sustainability. And 80% of the sub-Saharan African people are living actually in this region. So it will ultimately, because, you know, this aspiration of the African Union of Agenda 2063 is very much in line with the World Sustainable Development Goals. So it will ultimately also improve the livelihood of these people. Now, I just put this, I just throw this because as a championing of African solution to African problems. So once Kwame Nkrumah said, it's clear that we must find an African solution to our problems, and that this can only be found in African unity. Divided we are weak, united Africa could become one of the greatest forces for good in the world. I mean, from time to time, it's good to throw this and remind ourselves. Now, what does the Great Ethiopia Renaissance Dam means to this biggest Pan-African organization of the continent, namely the African Union, would mean? One, it will bring AU to the forefront in the face of the international community. As we have seen, you know, for the past decade, the tripartite countries, namely Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan, have been here. And then, I mean, originally the agreement was to solve it between themselves. Then it went to the African Union, and then it went to the US, and then it went to the UN. I mean, name it. This agenda is taken to everywhere, except that, I mean, it was in Africa, but I mean, I think I can say boldly, if I'm wrong, you can correct me, but I can say that it's Ethiopia who have really argued that this matter, if there is any fourth party has to be involved, it should be the African Union. So this brings the African Union in the face of the international community, that the African Union is able to take its own matter into its hand and can solve its own problems. Mostly we know that the AU is like kind of a bystander by the corner whenever problems happen in the continent. It's either it's the previous colonial powers or, someone from the international community that come and jump into it. Now this will give AU that it can solve its own problems. And then also it will hand, there's, not only in Africa, but also in the world, there's no so much water conflict that we are seeing. So it will give that experience for the African Union, even to the world, that kind of, it took us long, but I'm sure slowly but surely we will get there. So it gives that guideline of managing water conflicts Ethiopia by being, and also that we can say the other two, the downstream countries, Sudan and Egypt, Ethiopia, but by really being a pioneer. And it's a sacrificial, I could call it, paving that way. So for any member state or riparian state who have a similar problem or who will have a similar problem, it's Ethiopia today, but it could be any riparian state tomorrow who wants to build a hydroelectric power generating dam on the river. So it will hand over that guideline. I feel like I'm stuck. Okay, so another thing is lesson for Africa and its leaders. Number one, it is the self-funding of homegrown projects like the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. How many really big projects or national projects that we know are self-funded by member states. Mostly we get a loan from IMF or even countries. When they donate, they don't just donate. There's something that's there's a luggage that's coming with it. So it will give that confidence to member states that we can fund, we can finance our own projects. So we don't have to be liable for any funder or any previous colonial power, for that matter, whatever what may be required, behind the curtain. Of course, we wouldn't hear that. The second benefit that I would see is intergenerational projects are possible. See Ethiopia, let's forget what before Emperor Haile Selassie. Let's start from Emperor Haile Selassie to now Dr. Abiy. I said it, they have completely different political ideologies, but they made it. They have stick to this national project. We have all the possible conflicts in the country, all the challenges, all the pressure from outside and inside, but we have demonstrated as an Ethiopian that intergenerational projects are possible. Another lesson is that I would put forward is that changing the narrative of transboundary resources like Abai or Nile, mostly this kind of resources are taken as a source of contentious, not really as a matter of cooperation. Yes, it took us a long time, but we are demonstrating that it is possible to cooperate on transboundary resources. For me, GERD is really a symbol of Pan-African project because it does, for once and for all, it will dismantle that colonial treaties that where Egypt really wants to stick to and don't want to change to. And then it also breaks the cycle of economic dependence. So that is really, for me, the big thing, what GERD does for us, for Africa. my observation as I conclude this, I want to share is that, I think Professor Hagai, you share this maybe somewhere in your book, but also contemporarily, I have seen this when people of Abba, come all together, whoever shares the water, nature rejoices and demonstrates its support mysteriously. I can give you an example. I think it's during the first feeling of the GERD. If I'm wrong, then correct me. But the rainfall on the highlands of Ethiopia, and both also, which contributes the Lake Victoria fall, which contributes the 15%. Historically, after 20, I think for Lake Victoria is after 30 years, and for Ethiopia is after 20 years, it has been the highest rainfall. When we were accused of we are going to deprive the downstream country, or namely Egypt, of water, but look at what nature gave us. So when we come together, I think nature will help us mysteriously. I will skip this, but my recommendation is also to my fellow researchers here, how Ethiopia was able to resolve a transboundary issues, arising from a transboundary resource, should be studied and sampled and make it available for the continent and generations to come. With that, I end my presentation. Thank you very much.